Hi, I'm Nel Donato, artist and designer. Now, I personally find black to be the most useful color for sketchbooks and mixed media art journals, and often I will use only black and nothing else to make entire artworks. So, in today's video, I will share my favorite black art supplies and also show you some examples of how I use them in my own sketchbooks.
The first from my favorite black art supplies is a brush pen. And particularly, I mean this Pentel Pocket Kanji Fude brush pen, which has waterproof ink and it gives a very, very interesting expressive line. So it goes from very thin to very thick with a bit of variety and pressure. And I really enjoy that because it gives me the ability to make very interesting marks and draw kind of flowy shapes and things like foliage and hair and all the kind of interesting motifs that I most of all enjoy drawing. And I can show you some examples. For example, this is a brush pen over color ink background. And this portrait right here is also done entirely using brush pens, black one, yes, but also some color ones. And I have like a whole series. I mean, I'm not going to show you all my drawings, of course, but this is also all made using brush pens. So that's something that I enjoy because it has waterproof ink. This one has waterproof ink. Not all of them do. It's very dark, very intense. The lines are crisp and fluid. It's not so dry as some brush pens tend to be. And I want to emphasize that this has an actual synthetic bristle. So it's not like those felt tip markers, which are sometimes called brush pens, like, for example, this Tombow. Sometimes they are called brush pens, but they're actually felt tip. But this one has actual bristles, which makes it more similar to a brush that's been dipped in ink than in markers. And I prefer these to felt tip pens because they're more durable. So I've had this one, I'm not sure, since 2010 or maybe even longer. I don't remember. 2012, the same one. And I've only been changing the cartridges. And recently I started using bottled ink, which is platinum carbon ink. I've been using in this one. Just unfortunately not the same darkness as the original ink, but Pentel doesn't make a bottled ink for these, so which is a shame because I really like it. So anyway, it's a little light and very robust tool. It can make a variety of marks. It's waterproof, so you can use it alongside watercolor, which is what I tend to use, and any kind of water-soluble medium. But you also have these in non-waterproof form. So this is also a Pentel, I think it's called Art Brush. Sometimes they have different names in different countries. And you can use kind of to blend them with other types of tools or even with a water brush to get kind of these different shades. So that's an example of gray brush pen, black brush pen, and a bit of a water brush blending effect. So if you like more of these blending stuff, you can get the non-waterproof ones. And if you like the waterproofness of the ink, then you can get the one which is actually waterproof. One thing to note, it's not 100% waterproof over acrylics and gesso. So be careful if you're going with a brush over the line that you've already made using a brush pen. I've found that sometimes it can get a bit, you can get kind of a bit of it smudged, even though the ink is waterproof, because it's just not so stable when it's attached to some other surface as it is when it's directly on paper. So these work better directly on paper and then painted on top than vice versa. Now, another type of ink, so obviously this is great for details, but if I want to cover a larger area, then I don't want to spend all that precious ink, which is not so cheap. I would prefer to use something that is a bit more affordable. And in that case, I use regular plain old India ink. And this is a very cheap brand, Kohinoor. I think it's been like under $2, maybe even around $1. This is a Rotring ink, usually used in technical pens, but you can also use it for drawing. These are probably the most affordable tools that there are besides pencil, because a little goes a long way. You can get a lot of coverage of it, and it's really quite cheap. Usually you're going to apply it using a brush or using something like a drawing pen or a calligraphy pen or a drafting pen. Or even a rapidograph if you have one of those. Maybe your family has some left over from a time when they were still used in technical drawing. So here, let me just find something where I've used this. I usually use them to cover up a larger area. So this was a surface entirely covered with colored ink, similar to what's happening right here. And then I covered up over it with India ink to get this black negative space. On this drawing as well, the entire black background. Actually, I'm not so sure. I think this one I actually done using brush pen. But here I have something that I did using India ink. Where is it? Should mark my pages before doing videos so I can, oh, here it is. So this one is negative spaces painted using India ink with a brush, and then I did these little golden ornaments over it, also in ink. So that's usually when I use India ink. When I need to cover a larger area, oh, there's another one here. So this hair is entirely painted with black ink. Because just a couple of drops of ink are gonna spread across the paper effortlessly, and it's much faster than filling it in with a brush pen or a marker or something like that. But the downside of India ink, as flexible as it is, you can also mix it with water. You can it's also waterproof, so you can do whatever you want over it. Once it has sealed to the paper, it's resin-based, so you also have to be careful not to use it in pens that are not designed to be used with that type of ink. You can't use it over non-porous surfaces, so it's only good on paper. But if you want to use something that could work over acrylics, over gesso, over something that is kind of more laminated plastic, non-porous, then this is not going to work. It flakes off, it chips off. It gets dry, and it kind of just, if you go over it with something, it's just going to chip off. So in that case, instead of using India ink, you can use acrylic ink, or sometimes called liquid acrylic. Many brands make it. This one is by Royal Talents, their brand Amsterdam, a line of acrylics. I've seen those by Liquitex, by Golden. Lots of different brands make it. And so this is completely waterproof, and it will adhere to any type of surface, just like any other type of acrylic paint would, with the difference that this is actually liquid. Now, why is it cool that this acrylic is liquid? Because then you can use lots of different effects that you could use with regular ink. You could also use it with pens and apply it in a much more thin and detailed way. For example, let me get the page here. So I've only done a couple of details. I've filled in these circles on these flowers. I did these little lines here, kind of loose lines, and these ornaments and these kind of dropping lines, and I filled also in these bands, these circular bands with acrylic ink. Now here it's pure acrylic ink, and here I kind of diluted it with water, so you can also get a bit of translucent effects. And I could not have done that with India ink because this is acrylic background. This red here, it's essentially acrylic is plastic. So it's kind of limited what you can do over acrylics. But acrylic ink is also plastic, so it will adhere to anything like gesso, any kind of lacquer, glue, acrylic, whatever you want to pour it on, it is going to stick. And you can also do nice splatter effects. I don't have an example here because I no longer have stuff with me that I've done using this ink, but essentially it's really convenient in all the places where you can't use regular plain India ink. Now, the price difference is significant. This one, 51 kuna amounts to around $8.50 or around $9. Not sure what the conversion rate is right now. But this one is like under $2, probably even around $1. So you can see that the price difference is quite a difference, but this one is a lot more versatile, and I would probably advise to have both. Maybe you start with this one, which is a lot cheaper, and then you get this one for just to use on Canvas or on mixed media journal pages, where this one is not going to work over other materials, because this one can work as a bottom layer, but not over acrylics and some other stuff. But bottle goes a long way. It's going to take me probably years to go through this one, whereas these ones I go through a little more often, and they're also somewhat smaller, so it's not that big of a deal. Now, another type of acrylic, which is not really paint, but it's an acrylic medium, and it's also among my favorites, is black gesso. And I only discovered black gesso maybe a year ago, and when I discovered it, I was like, where were you all my life? I love you. That's how that's my reaction when I encountered black gesso for the first time. So gesso, if you don't know what it is, it's a primer. You use it on a surface that you want to turn into a ready-made surface to make art on. And the cool thing about gesso is because it is acrylic based, it's an acrylic medium, acrylic ground, we might call it more specifically. It can adhere to any kind of surface, including wood, metal, plastic. Metal, not sure about metal, but okay. Plastic, wood, chipboard, different kinds of cardboard, paper, whatever you want, like any kind of scraps that you have lying around, and also thin papers that may not be necessarily good to make art on their own, but you can just take a loose kind of scrap of paper. This is just some scrap packaging from I don't even know where, and I could just cover that in gesso and draw or paint over that, even though this particular card may not on its own be a viable surface to make art on. So basically, if you have gesso, you can turn anything into a surface to make art on. And if you have black gesso, you can turn anything into a black surface, a beautiful black surface that you can make art on. And I have, I don't have many examples. Oh no, I'm lying. I do have many examples, but let's just find which one is the closest to me. Okay. So this is an example of a page covered with black gesso where I then went over with white paint and then maybe a little ellipses. And black gesso is something between matte and satin. So it's not like powdery matte. It is smooth to the touch, but it has some grit. So the great thing about gesso is that you can use it also with some drawing mediums, which may not work on regular acrylics. So this is a test page that I made when I first tried gesso for the first time. And so here I have lots of different things. I have white gouache, I have white crayons, I have gel pens this is metallic gold, I have some crayons in red color, pastel pencils, all sorts of stuff, which are all working decent maybe not, some of them are looking a bit more transparent, but they all work. They all adhere to the gesso, whereas they would not adhere to regular black acrylic. I tried the same things with black acrylic before, and it just didn't work. So some of the effects that you can see in my sketchbooks and journals, they're just not possible with black acrylic. You actually need to use, or maybe they're possible with matte acrylic paint, but unfortunately I don't have that on me. So here's another page where I used black gesso to kind of cover things up underneath, and then I went on and drew over it with other pens. So black gesso is awesome. And I also sometimes use it just instead of black paint. So here you have these little, this hexagonal pattern. Hello, focus. Okay, so this hexagonal pattern, I used a stencil to do that, and I used black gesso instead of black paint. So nowadays, I just mostly use black gesso, even if I could be using a black paint instead of that. Some artists actually use it to mix paints. You can use it with white paint or white gesso to create gray shades. So I've seen people who use white gesso and black gesso just to create a grayscale portrait or some other kind of grayscale composition instead of regular paint, because they just like the texture of it. And I must say, I also prefer the texture of gesso to the texture of regular acrylic paint. So yeah, that's basically what I wanted to mention about black gesso. I prefer it to black paint, yeah, you can also use a variety of materials on it that you might not otherwise be able to use. Now, the thing with all these paints and inks that I've shown you, sometimes they require preparation and cleanup. They can get messy. Usually when I work with gesso and acrylic, I wear gloves because things get on your hands and under your nails. And also this beautiful white desk that I have here, I need to cover it with some protective sheets or scrap paper or something so that it's I don't get stuff attached to it. And that is sometimes just, I don't have time for it. I don't want to deal with that. And in that case, if I want to keep things extremely simple and very, very clean, then I'm going to use a water-soluble crayon. And a water-soluble crayon is essentially a wax crayon or an oil-based pastel. They get made in both varieties, which when you run a wet brush over it, then it turns into like a paint-like texture. So, for example, this is just some scrap paper I have lying around. This is the crayon, nothing special, but when you run a wet brush over it, then it turns into a watercolor-like paint, except this is not so much as like watercolor. It's more like gouache. It has more of a kind of opaque coverage, which is why I like it. It works really well over other colored surfaces, and it's very convenient. It's very flexible. You can use it dry, you can use it wet, you can dilute it with different kinds of mediums and with water, with glue, whatever you have on hand. That's kind of this acrylic media variety. You can mix it very well with these crayons. Now, these are very similar to other brands. I don't have a black one in other brands, but I do have these similar ones, which are made by Caran d'Ache. So this is like grayish black, and this is an indigo blue. And I sometimes use these instead of black if I don't want to have like this very, very clean black look. Maybe I want something a bit more natural, then I'm going to use these instead. But they essentially work in the same way, except these are just pure pigment and binder sticks, and these have this wooden casing around them, which kind of makes them less breakable. And they're actually advertised for kids, so that I think that's why they put them in this protective casing. And, as adults, we can use these ones with no issues. So you can buy these. These I've bought individually. I bought this one as a part of a set. Some brands come in sets and some brands come also in an open edition, so you can pick out the colors that you like. And what I like about these crayons is that they can make marks on anything, like literally on plastic, on paper, on whatever. Like even here on my white lacquer desk, I can, write over that. And then if I want to like clean it up, all I need to take is like a bit of water and a wet rag, and it's just gonna come off. So here's a bit of water, and here's a little rag. And okay, I could definitely do a better job at that, but right now. Okay, that was not crayon. That was something else that was stuck on my rag. Anyway, that's just what I wanted to demonstrate here, how flexible they really are. And that is why I like them so much, because you can use them in all kinds of different situations. For example, here, what I like to do with them, especially with the black one, I like to draw and paint on top of other colors. And here I have used this diluted black crayon, diluted with water, to cover these negative spaces. And I was even able to write with a marker over it, although if you do a really thick layer, then that might not work as well. But in this case, it worked really well. So here I have another. So that was, if you're wondering, the background is just some collage covered with matte acrylic paint. So these stick really well to matte paint, and you can dilute them with water and they will form this very opaque film. But on glossy color, they will just wipe off if you dilute them with water. On glossy color, it's better to use them just on their own. Okay, so this is also another drawing where I used them over acrylic and diluted them with water. And I think I have something else here, so this is also, the background is gesso, and I painted the negative space with a black crayon diluted with water. I mean, it's not like perfect coverage as you would have with black paint or black ink, but it's sufficient enough. And this is painted with gouache paint over that. So these are water soluble, which means that you need to be careful about using it with other types of paint, because they will mix. So if you mix something like gouache or acrylic paint or something like that, there will kind of blend together, which can be a really nice effect. So you can use this to tint something like white paint and also get shades of gray. That's really cool. But really, what I like to use them for is for scribbles and to make these large dark areas. You can also wet the tip and draw with that, and that will give you a bit of a thicker line if you want that. Or you can use a wet brush, a regular brush, or a water brush, and just dip the tip of the brush directly onto the crayon, and you can paint with that. But this brush is rather wet, so the color is not very intense, but if you use a more drier brush, it's going to give you a more intense look. So basically there are many ways you can use them, and that's why I like them. So instead of using like a bottle of ink or a tube of paint, I'm going to have this one on me when I travel, and I don't have to worry about making a mess in my bag. Or if I'm drawing or sketching on the couch or somewhere in an Airbnb or somewhere, also I don't have to worry about damaging someone's furniture or my own pillows or textiles, because this is gonna wash off really easy. This also makes it kid friendly and travel friendly, so if that's important to you, I think it's a nice tool to have. And lastly, the tool that I want to share with you is the Humble Charcoal. And charcoal has several forms. The one that I have here are so-called vine charcoal, which come in these little twigs that have been burned to a char, and then you can use it to make marks with. And this is a pencil charcoal, which is like compressed charcoal in the form of a pencil that you can sharpen and make fine lines with. There are also charcoal sticks. I don't have any, but from what I understood, they give you a much darker line, a much more opaque coverage as compared to these twigs, which give you a more subtler, kind of misty look. But I honestly like the charcoal specifically because of that misty look. If I want something super dark, then I'm just going to use ink or acrylic paint or even the wax crayon that I've shown you. But what I like charcoal about is the ability to make very, very soft effects. So I have a couple of drawings here where I've used it. So this is just charcoal on its own. And when you use charcoal, usually you're going to blend the shades to get this kind of grayscale effect. And to do that, you will need these blending stumps or tortillions. And this is a quite useful tool to have. So you use that instead of your fingers because, first of all, maybe you don't want to get stuff on your fingers. And second, you don't want to get oils from your hands onto the paper because that makes the paper it's more difficult to add more pigment onto it once it has been saturated with your oils. And no matter how clean your hands are, you'll always have some kind of oily residue on them. So this enables me to create really, really soft shades. But this one is not actually the best example of why I love them. Because this is another one where I've used just charcoal and a bit of pastel pencil over a collage background. But what I really like charcoal for is this. So this is an example where I had a drawing underneath using watercolor pencils and ordinary color pencils. And then I've used charcoal sticks to create this kind of a dark mist over it. So it's very subtle. It gives a kind of dreamy effect. And then I only use a charcoal pencil to get these very dark lines here and in the eyes and eyebrows, just to kind of make the contrast more intense. But usually I prefer the sticks and to just blend them. And here I'm also blending them with fingers. You can do that. You just don't want to do that all the time. So also to note, charcoal is one of the cheapest art supplies out there. So it is definitely something that you might want to get, even if you're not sure what to do with it, just to have it on hand and to try it, because it really doesn't cost a lot. And it gives such interesting effects, especially in combination with other tools. Charcoal will work on any kind of surface that has grit, paper, cardboard. There are specific like pastel papers where the charcoal is going to work a bit better, maybe than on our regular smooth paper. But it is going to work on some smoother papers as well. It is not super opaque, though the sticks are more intense and more opaque in color than these twigs. When you do something using charcoal, you need to spray it with fixative so it doesn't smudge. Usually, that's going to kind of maybe make the color, if you're using some kind of color in it, maybe that will affect the colors a bit. But if you're using just black charcoal, it's not going to make a big of a difference. So this one has not been changed at all using spray fixative. But you just might want to do that so it doesn't smudge onto the next page. Because I sprayed this one with fixative, you can see that only the edges have transferred a bit to the adjacent page, but it haven't, like, the drawing itself hasn't transferred onto the other side, and that's what fixative prevents, the transfer of the little charcoal particles from one paper to another. You can also use a cheap hairspray if you're only doing that in your sketchbook and are not too precious about the archival nature of the materials you're using. But if you seal charcoal with a couple of coats of fixative, you can also paint over that using acrylic paints. And I haven't done that yet, but I definitely intend to, because I think that might make a really nice effect. I've only done the other way around. I've only drawn with charcoal over paint, but I haven't yet used paint or charcoal, but it can be done. I've seen other people make really, really nice stuff with that. So definitely something to test. So I've shared some of my favorite black art supplies with you, and you may be wondering, you've seen some of my works that I've shared with you, what I did to make all these light stuff over the black backgrounds, because as I tend to like black backgrounds a lot, and I use a lot of white on dark kind of compositions. So if you're wondering what I've used, I will share it in another video. So stay tuned and you will be able to learn about my favorite white art supplies for mixed media journaling, and especially those that work well over dark surfaces. In the meantime, feel free to share your black favorites with me in the comments, and why you like them. You know, maybe you like something that I haven't shared, or maybe you have a suggestion of something that I haven't yet tried. I would love to learn more about that. And I hope to see you in the next video.